Welcome back to the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast. I am your host, Jesse Ewell, and today we're going to be talking about the habit of serving versus being selfish.
You are tuning in to the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast with your host, Jesse Ewell. This is the Habit-Based Lifestyle. Let's go.
Selfish. So today, as I was preparing for this podcast, earlier today I was at a client of mine's house and was speaking to a group of people on our team, and the topic of being a servant versus being selfish came up. And as we sat there, we talked about things in our marriage, right? And some of the people were married, some of them were single, some of them had been married or been in relationships. But the idea with it all was this, that, inside of our marriage, our job is to serve our spouse. And, the thing that we often think about is, as we serve our spouse, we put their needs ahead of ours. It's no longer about, us first. It's about putting their needs before our own. And that is the ultimate way that we can serve. Now, if we think about this, serving our spouse, is essentially putting their needs in front of ours, which, for some people listening to this, and for me for a period of time in my own marriage, that was hard for me to think of or hard to do. And there's been times in my life where, when I was younger, it was more about being selfish and serving myself. It wasn't about, serving others or serving other people. And I want to wrap this up because there's two ways that we're going to look at this today. We're going to look at, number one, serving your spouse. Number two, thinking about this in the same perspective as, serving your clients, serving, the people that work for you, in ways that you can see your own blind spots. Because most of the time, if I'm showing up in the number one relationship I have, my marriage, and I'm being selfish, chances are that I'm showing up in every other relationship that same exact way. And if we think about this, my number one relationship besides with God is with my wife. And if I don't value that and serve my wife, the chances of everybody else happening and that happening to other people, it's probably happening everywhere. So serving, having a servant attitude, having a servant mentality doesn't mean that we're a slave. It doesn't mean that, we're doing all of these things. What it really comes down to is this one thing. A servant mentality is putting the needs of the other person ahead of our own. And I think, one of the best examples we could think of is like, hey, if I'm putting my wife's needs before my own, I want to make sure that she gets her needs met before I get mine. Now, most relationships and most people, they think of it in a selfish way. I'm only going to meet my spouse's needs if they meet mine. That's what selfish is. And selfish is often, comes with blame, victim mentality, where you are, you're not going to do anything for the other person unless they do something for you. And, think about this. If that mentality doesn't work in business, why would it work in a marriage? Why would it work in a relationship? So really, the only relationship that works in business is putting other people's needs, potential customers' needs, people on your team's needs ahead of your own, which ultimately means that you are there to help serve them. You are there to help them achieve what they want to achieve in their business, what they want to achieve working with you. And, this analogy is probably the best way I could think of it, because a lot of times we wouldn't show up for our clients in our business selfishly, like, hey, I'm not going to help you unless you help me. Typically, that relationship is not going to work out. And so, this is often the mentality we have to break. We have to break, the selfish mentality of, being a victim, wanting to blame someone else. Nobody wants to hang out with the victims. Nobody wants to hang out with someone who's playing the blame game, blaming everybody else for their problems. And we all have people in our circles that are like that. They, talk about, why things are the way they are. They blame someone else for their issues, yet being a victim and blaming someone is very selfish. It's very self-centered, and it all has to do with you and very rarely the other person. And so, as we think about the mentality of what people have today and what they can get caught up in is very selfish, victim mentality, where they are constantly blaming other people for their issues, for their lack of results, and for their relationships. And inside of business, inside of, people working for you, if they don't feel like you're there to serve them, they don't feel like you're there and you have their needs, as like one of the things that you care about, they are not going to get the results. They are not going to put in the energy with you to actually help you achieve, the results you want, and I think of a lot of times when, I was younger as a business owner, I thought about my needs were number one. Hey, I'm not going to give this, person who works for me, I'm not going to help them until they actually, begin to help me. And having that, that was really hard to, get results in business as a business owner, because so much of it was dependent on whether or not, I would only show up, a certain way depending on how that person showed up. And here's the thing is, leaders, it's hard to be a leader because leaders show up to serve. Leaders show up in a place of they don't care what happens or what the other person does. They don't show up with an expectation of, hey, this person has to do these things for me or else I won't lead them. And I think about, a servant heart is, the best way we can describe it is like showing up as a leader who doesn't expect anything else in return, showing up as a leader who they are going to lead and they are going to put the other person's needs ahead of their own. And ultimately, that is the place that we can show up the most powerfully, because we're showing up to help. We're showing up to, help someone achieve the results that they ultimately want. And this usually ends up in a win-win relationship. Now, we can think of it this way: how many of you would want to have a relationship with someone who is very selfish, self-centered? It happens, but this is the reality that we live in today. And we can all think of the friend or the person in our life who's very selfish. They're very about themselves, and we kind of get into this place where they feel like they're keeping score. They feel like they're doing more than the other person, yet a servant would very, very rarely ever think of it that way. And so if you're in the marketplace trying to build a business, like, hey, are you showing up as a servant to your people that work for you? Are you showing up with an attitude like, hey, I'm here to serve you, what can I help you with? Or are you showing up very selfishly where it's like, hey, if you don't do these things for me, I'm not going to help you? And I think the drawback, what most people will say is, well, if they're not doing it, why should I? But guess what? Leaders don't think that way. Leaders do it anyway. And then they decide like, hey, if I'm serving this person at the level that they could be served and they're still not getting it, then it's probably time for you to move on and find somebody else. Same thing with a client. Are you showing up with a servant attitude for your clients, or are you showing up very selfishly to where, hey, unless my clients do these things, I'm not actually going to show up? And this is the this is one of the big mistakes that I see people make is like, hey, just ask yourself, like, hey, am I showing up as the servant, or am I showing up very selfishly? And I know, the guys that I talk to in business and the guys that I talk that are married, they oftentimes are stuck in the victim cycle, the blame game cycle, and they're waiting for their wife oftentimes to selfishly do something for them before they'll actually show up for their wife. And, this is a backwards way of really getting what you want in your marriage. You may get what you want in some ways, but on the other side of it, you're probably not going to be very happy. I know this, that the times where me and my wife are the most connected, it's usually because I'm showing up with more of that servant attitude, and I'm willing to put her needs ahead of mine. The times where we're more disconnected, it's because I'm showing up with more of the selfish attitude, and that's where the true disconnection is coming into play. So if you guys are sitting there and you're like, hey, I'm married, we have kids, we have all these things, like, are you showing up in your marriage as a servant, or are you showing up with a very selfish attitude, very selfish behavior, and expecting your spouse to serve you, yet you won't even serve them? So I wanted to share this today on the podcast because I really believe that this is a epidemic. This is a habit going on, not only in our marriages, not only in our relationships, but it's going on in the business. It's going on with our teams. It's going on with our clients. And there's a way to break out of it. And it's just to begin to recognize, like, hey, how am I showing up? How can I better show up as the servant? Because that is the one that's going to get me the results I want. Showing up selfishly to temporarily get what I want. You may get it temporarily, but in the long run, you're not going to be fulfilled, and you're going to be very unhappy, and you're not going to be able to have the relationships you want with your employees, with your clients, and even with your spouse if you show up with a selfish manner. So if you guys want to know any more about what we do inside the Habit-Based Lifestyle Program, we're working on building our Instagram account. So you can simply go to Jesse, JESSE.EWELL. You can, follow us. I'd love to hear from you. Send me a DM, send me a message. Let me know some subjects that you want to talk about. The other thing is if you guys have any questions, feedback, or want to reach out, just simply Jesse@habitbasedlifestyle.com. And then we also have a Facebook group where we dive deeper into lifestyle habits and business habits for health professionals and coaches, where we help you grow your business and grow in your life by an extra 10 to 30K every single month. Simply just reach out to us. Join our Facebook group. It's called Habit-Based Lifestyle and Business Secrets. It's in the show notes. Until next episode, have a great day.
You are tuning in to the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast with your host, Jesse Ewell. This is the Habit-Based Lifestyle. Let's go.